really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here again today for another episode. I really enjoy having these little conversations. They're little monologues, actually, but sharing with you some of the information I'm reading about, things I'm working on and learning in hopes that whatever is happening in my journey might be something going on for you too as well, and that what shows up for me might help you. And I hope that's true today, because I'm going to be talking about why we need more self-compassion and less self-esteem. And so this topic became very interesting to me just over the last week or so, because I'm actually doing some coaching with a coach on my eating habits, talking about mindful eating. And one thing that was given to me as a piece of homework was to work on self-compassion. And I was introduced to the website of Dr. Kristin Neff, N-E-F-F, who has researched self-compassion for years now. She's so productive and has so many papers written on the importance of self-compassion. And this was really an eye-opener for me. And so it's something I thought that I would share with you, the idea of self-compassion and why it's so important. It's a term I've used before, but I would say without fully understanding what it meant, and certainly without fully being able to do it. So I've learned a few techniques, a few things that I'm finding really helpful to me and really illuminating, and I thought I would just come on here and share those with you. So I mentioned in the title for this episode why we need more self-compassion and less self-esteem, because one of the things that Kristin Neff points out on her website is that self-compassion is very different than self-esteem. Self-esteem emphasizes being special, being better than other people. It emphasizes comparing yourself to others and evaluating your strengths, your positives, and basing your worth on whatever you find as through those comparisons and through that valuation. And it occurred to me that self-esteem actually comes from the ego. We're actually talking about how the ego feels about itself and about us, about who we are and who it is. And because it's ego-based, it tends to be selfish and self-focused. And Kristin Neff points out that self-compassion is very different. Even though we might confuse them, we might think that self-compassion is also selfish, self-indulgent, that it's based on trying to have greater self-esteem, but it's actually something different. And this was a mind opener for me when I read this and when I started to think about it, that self-compassion is actually just treating yourself with kindness instead of with judgment and criticism. And self-esteem oftentimes can only arise if we're doing really well. And what goes hand in hand with self-esteem is constant evaluation and judgment and criticism, again, which comes from the ego. And I've talked about this in the journey from ego to soul, that the ego is constantly measuring and evaluating and making comparisons. And the ego can really torture us in that area by constantly pointing out how we're not good enough. But the ego at the same time can become very attached with the things we do well and can focus on those things so much and derive positive energy and positive feelings from the things we're good at, that the ego allows itself to ignore our own shadow and to ignore the areas where we could use some work, the places where we need to grow a little bit more. And it occurred to me, people often talk about how the millennial generation is full of people with narcissism. And it occurred to me that's because as parents, when I was raising my kids, we were told your child's self-esteem is the most important thing. You have to make sure that they always feel special and feel good about themselves. So that's where the idea of giving out participation trophies to every single student who's part of a competition so that no one ever felt bad about themselves. And while I agree somewhat with the idea behind that of not singling out necessarily the most special child and not making some child feel they're less than or not as good as others, if we emphasize too much on developing self-esteem and always thinking of myself as I'm the best, I'm the prettiest, I'm the smartest, I do better than everyone else, that self-esteem can actually become inflated in a false sort of way. It can actually just be the ego puffing itself up. And self-esteem can have very little true substance to it. It can be punctured and deflated fairly easily when one thing goes wrong. And if we've relied on this superficial, fictitious self-esteem as our source of positive feelings about ourselves, we can be devastated fairly easily when we fail at something or make a terrible mistake or cause an accident or do something wrong, or when we're forced to look at ourselves in an honest way. And so self-esteem pushes us to constantly try to be better and to constantly look at our successes and reject or push away the areas where we're not doing as well, to refuse to see those parts of ourselves because it's too painful, it hurts too much. So it was so enlightening for me to think about this and read about this and to understand the limitations of self-esteem. And yet what Kristin Neff writes about is that self-compassion is very different because it doesn't involve evaluating yourself or making comparisons. You treat yourself with kindness because every human deserves kindness. It doesn't matter how much you've accomplished or what you do or how good you are or beautiful you are or smart you are. Every human being deserves kindness. So self-compassion is simply treating yourself with the kindness that everyone should have. And she emphasizes as well that we honor and accept our humanness when we're operating from self-compassion. Self-compassion really comes from our higher consciousness, not from the ego. Self-compassion allows us to see our own ego and to see what the ego wants and how the ego is measuring and evaluating things, but to feel compassion and kindness about the ego's ways of operating, but to also be able to look at the shadow, to look at our flaws, our failures, the ways we haven't measured up, and to look at them not with judgment, not with shame, but simply with compassion and acceptance, like, well, I'm human. This is what it's like to be human. We're not perfect. We can't do everything right. We can't be the best at everything. Self-compassion allows us to honor and accept that humanness and to treat ourselves with kindness instead of judgment and criticism. And one thing that Kristin Neff writes about that she has found is that self-compassion actually decreases self-pity, because when we are self-compassionate, we are acknowledging that we're not perfect. And so it takes us out of the realm of being a victim. We don't see ourselves as being harmed by other people. We see the full spectrum of who we are. I've made mistakes. I've done some things wrong. I have some pain. I carry some wounds because of things that have happened to me in my life, but I accept all of that. And we accept it as part of being human, as part of life. This is just how life is. And it keeps us from feeling like a victims, that someone else has treated us badly or life has treated us badly or we haven't received something we deserve, whereas self-esteem would push us to imagine imagine that we deserve to be treated really well and respected and given all kinds of accolades and awards by other people. Self-compassion says it's okay. It's okay if we don't receive those things. It's okay if we weren't perfect this time around. It's okay if we didn't win. That's all right. We don't have to be victims. We don't have to look for someone else to blame for any failures that we have. So self-compassion is very different than self-pity. She says self-compassion is also different from self-indulgence because we take responsibility for our mistakes. We acknowledge the things that haven't gone well in our lives. We hold them with acceptance and compassion. Again, we don't blame ourselves and be overly critical and judgmental about it, but we acknowledge it and we take responsibility. We make amends when it's necessary. So we're not indulging the wounded ego that wants to constantly be stroked, that constantly needs positive feedback from other people, that constantly needs this influx of good, positive feelings. We're able to sit with the pain and the responsibility of sometimes making mistakes and not doing as much as we wish we could have done. And again, self-compassion is not the same as self-esteem, which emphasizes being special and entitlement and can lead us to narcissistic behavior. Self-compassion leads us to healthier, more balanced self-appreciation. And self-compassion also helps us build resilience and coping skills, which is something that we all need right now. Kristen Neff has done research that shows people with higher self-compassion and less self-esteem are more resilient. As I just said, they have a more accurate concept of self, of who they truly are. They actually can see themselves more clearly and still appreciate themselves, even though they see the truth about themselves. They tend to have more caring relationships. They are capable of more caring behavior toward people they are in relationship with because they're less narcissistic. And that's one of the major characteristics as well. Less narcissism in people who practice self-compassion than people who rely on self-esteem for feeling good about themselves. And self-compassionate people are also less prone to reactive anger, meaning they're less likely to lash out when something goes wrong, less likely to blame someone else or get upset or angry when things don't work out the way that we wish they could. They cope better, they're more resilient, they're able to stay on an even keel. So on her website, Kristen Neff, that's kristenneff.com, has a lot of practices, and these are some things I've been working on that can help you develop self-compassion. And I'm all about this now. I think it's really important. So I wanted to just talk about it. One of those practices is to think about, how would I treat a close friend? And this is particularly if you find yourself in a difficult situation when things are not going well, you're feeling unhappy or stressed, maybe feeling confused about your next steps or what to do, and it feels as if things are falling apart. To stop for a moment and contemplate, what if a friend of mine were going through this very thing? How would I behave toward my friend? And what would I say to my friend? The moment we begin that process of witnessing our own suffering as if it's a bit separate from us, as if it is within another person, a person that we love and care about, we engage our higher self, our higher consciousness, the witnessing self, which is able to look at us and our emotions and to view that more clearly. So we step into our higher consciousness, actually, when we're thinking about how would I treat my friend? What would I say to my friend? Our higher consciousness is saying to our wounded ego, you are my friend, and I'm going to say to you the kind and compassionate things that you need to hear right now when you're suffering. So this is an amazing little trick in a way of stepping outside the ego, to stop looking at this issue only through the lens of the ego, but to get into higher consciousness, to become the witness and watch what's happening with your lower self. Watch what's happening with your ego, which is your good friend that you're reaching out to help. The way I utilized this exercise was simply to write down a lot of statements that I might make to a friend that I cared about. And actually, because I'm a doctor, I also viewed it as what if it were a patient coming to me with issues? And in my case, it's issues around eating, like issues around eating foods that are not necessarily good for me, but that I like desserts. And what would I say to my patient about that? How would I treat my best friend who was going through this situation? And it was extremely powerful to write down all the things that I might say and all the things that I might say in response to my friend's self-judgment and to my friend's feeling of being a victim to someone else, or of life not being fair, of things not working out the way I wanted it to. What would I say to comfort that person and offer more support? So this exercise of writing down all the things that I would say, it's really powerful because I have those in my journal now and I can go back and read them. When I find myself in a state of kind of cyclical thinking on a negative track, judging myself, being too critical, blaming myself, I can go back and read those statements, which came from my witnessing self, my higher consciousness, and move myself into that place of higher contemplation, that higher view of what's happening and what I'm going through right now, and getting out of the ego, which is the part of me that feels victimized or disappointed or self-blame and self-judgment. And then Kristen Neff also has another exercise like this. Is just a 3-step little exercise that you can use in any situation, and I've been using it myself. The moment that you're in a situation where you feel frustrated or upset or things are falling apart, you're beginning to judge yourself, you're aware of lots of self-recriminating thoughts coming up in your mind, cycling back and forth. These are 3 things for you to remember and to repeat to yourself. First of all, say to yourself, this is really hard. What's happening to me, what I'm going through right now, it's really hard. And I'm really struggling right now in this moment. To simply acknowledge that life is hard sometimes. We go through lots of things that are difficult and challenging for us. And it's important to be able to acknowledge that. And to acknowledge it from a neutral position in a way, which is how our higher consciousness looks at it. We don't have to judge it as good or bad, but it's okay to say, this is hard and I'm having a hard time. I'm not sure what to do next. I'm not sure how I will get through this. It's hard. So you start with that acknowledgement of where you are. That alone, you're listening, your higher self is listening to your lower self describe what's going on and what challenges you're experiencing. The second message is, it's normal to feel like this during such a hard time. Like, this is all normal. I'm not a bad person. I'm not weak. It's normal to feel this way and to have all these mixed emotions going through me and to feel this chaos that's happening right now. And to add to that, many other people are also suffering right now in various ways. Because the importance of this second statement is, first of all, to normalize the challenge that you're experiencing, the thoughts you're having, the difficulty you're going through, but to also universalize it, to remember that other humans are also having a hard time. It's not just you. It's not you alone going through a challenging time. Life itself is hard for everyone, and everyone goes through times like this. So you're not alone, and you're not alone with your ego trying to solve this problem. You actually are connected to your higher consciousness, your higher self as well. You have more wisdom within you than you even realize. So the second step, again, normalize the feelings that you have, whatever emotions are coming up. It's okay. Allow them to be there. Normalize and accept them. And then recognize that many other people are actually in a similar place right now, going through similar struggles and challenges. And so this is something common that human beings experience. And then the third statement, which I love, is to simply say, may I be kind to myself. And so it puts the emphasis on exactly how, in this moment of challenge and difficulty, how you should treat yourself. You should not beat yourself up. You should not criticize and judge yourself, hate yourself, blame yourself for whatever has happened. You should be kind to yourself, because you would be kind to another person if you saw them suffering in this same way. Extend the kindness to yourself. Extend gentleness to yourself. And what that means, again, is that you hold all the negativity, all the challenge and the difficulty, all the struggle that you're having, the negative emotions that are arising within you, the thoughts that are going on in your head. You hold all of that, but you choose from your higher consciousness to simply be kind to yourself about it. And you might say something to yourself like, oh, I know how hard this is, but it will get better. I know this is a rough time, but I'm not alone, and I'll figure out how to get through this because I've been through some hard things before. So those are some of the kind things that you can say to yourself. And that's also when you might go back to your list of statements that you wrote in your journal of things you would say to a friend who's going through a hard time. Like, wow, I get it. I can see how challenging this is right now. And I can see that it's hard to figure out how this is going to end up. Where are we headed? How will we ever work through this? But I understand and I know that there is a way through it and that we will get there. We just have to give it time, and we have to be patient right now. So those are some of those statements, reassuring statements that you would give to a friend that you can say to yourself in this act of being kind to yourself. So I just want to review a little bit. What I've talked about so far is just remembering that self-compassion is not the same as self-esteem. In fact, self-compassion is deep. Self-compassion is actually foundational. You can actually grow much stronger and more resilient and have better coping skills if you utilize self-compassion and give up trying to find self-esteem in your life. Don't focus on evaluating and judging yourself. Focus instead on how can I be kinder to myself? How can I love myself more just as I am, with all of my flaws and my shortcomings and my weaknesses? How can I love myself more? So remember to treat yourself with kindness rather than judgment and criticism. Remember that self-compassion leads you away from self-pity, takes you away from being a victim and from narcissism. Self-compassion isn't self-indulgent. It isn't selfish. Self-compassion is actually the root of your caring and care for other people. And then remember to write down in your journal how you would treat a close friend who is going through a hard time. And the 3 statements to repeat to yourself: this is really hard. I'm really struggling right now, to acknowledge what's happening. Number 2, it's normal to feel like this during such a hard time. Many other people are also suffering now. So you normalize and you connect with other people in this universal time of suffering. And then number 3, may I be kind to myself. And even when you say it, put your hand over your heart to remind yourself that this is a time for gentleness and for tenderness. So I hope that you find your way to self-compassion. This is a big project for me to work on and something new for me that, to be honest, I've never really considered before. I've never put any time and energy into it before, but I'm already seeing some benefits from it. It's already changing things. It's helping me feel empowered in so many other areas of my life. So that's why I wanted to share it with you, even though it's new for me. So I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the ways it's going to work out for me, but I wanted to let you know about this self-compassion practice. So maybe you can try it too while I'm working on it. And remember, that website is KristenNeff.com if you want to go there and learn some more of her exercises and look at her wonderful research. So until we're together again next week, remember that we're here for love, for self-love and self-compassion. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life might throw at you next, and love each and every moment of your precious life. Bye-bye.